debate and diplomacy. Cheers.
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 Oh, hello my friends. Welcome to History by the Fire. My name is Ilan.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Nathan.
Today we will...
Ilan, I think you can stop with the accent.
Okay, fine. Today we will talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was a 12-day standoff in Cuba in October of 1962 between Soviet and American forces. It was the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war. Thankfully, it was resolved by diplomacy.
The Cuban Missile Crisis resulted from international debate, miscommunication, secret communication, and fear on both sides, which led to some nearly catastrophic failures.
In 1945, World War II ended. The Allied forces have just defeated the Axis powers. Although they were on the same side during the war, the USSR and most of Europe were still recovering, while the US became a superpower, which made the Soviets feel threatened. The USA, on the other hand, was afraid of Soviet domination in Eastern Europe and that Soviets would try to spread communism to the West.
That started the long Cold War, in which both sides used tools like spying and political propaganda against their opponents.
Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
What Kennedy meant was, are you with us or against us? Because a few months later, the Bay of Pigs invasion happened.
Bay of Pigs.
Ilan, what are you doing?
Oh, sorry, what were we talking about?
Bay of Pigs! By then, Cuba was taken over by communist dictator Fidel Castro. They were definitely the closest communist nation to the U.S., located only 90 miles south of Florida. Because of that strategic location, the U.S. government secretly tried to help Cuban exiles overthrow Castro. The failed attempt escalated tensions even further.
In addition, the USSR was feeling very threatened by the 100 missiles the US placed in Turkey, since they were capable of reaching Moscow. The Soviet Union tested Tsar Bomba, which is the most powerful bomb ever created and tested. The detonation was supposed to be a secret, but it was detected by the US intelligence.
Pretty much, USA and USSR are just going back and forth.
Since the failed invasion, Castro felt that the U.S. cannot be trusted and turned for support of the Soviet Union and its leader, Nikita Khrushchev. He secretly asked the USSR to send missiles to Cuba and point them at the major American cities to deter future invasion attempts. Hence the name Cuban Missile Crisis.
So Khrushchev and Castro exchanged letters back and forth, and Khrushchev agreed to send missiles to Cuba, despite a public warning from Kennedy.
Okay guys, so my grandpa actually used to serve in the Soviet army. Military units were urgently called up, given civilian clothes, fake documents, and machine guns with folding stock, which made them easier to hide. They were sent to Mykolaiv, an industrial military port. Ships loaded with missiles and tens of thousands of troops were sent to Cuba under disguise of an agricultural mission. I served in the missile unit. Missiles had to be stored separate from the warheads, horizontally, in sealed packaging, and in an underground temperature and moisture controlled unit. In case of alarm, nuclear warheads would be attached to the missiles on location, guided and fueled for launch. The entire process took about 3.5 hours. However, U.S. surveillance plans photographed the Cuban missiles already raised, which means that during the crisis, the U.S. was only about an hour away from being bombed. Each missile was about 1 to 2 megatons, which is about 67 to 130 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb.
On October 16, 1962, Kennedy received confirmation that the missiles were in Cuba, and he tried to negotiate with the Soviets to remove them.
Some advised Kennedy to invade Cuba and bomb its installations.
Others feared military retaliation, so they wanted to give the Soviet Union just a strong warning. Kennedy picked something in the middle. He sent a letter to Khrushchev, and he ordered a naval quarantine of Cuba. He also went on TV and told Americans that he was prepared to use military force to defend the United States.
Soviets weren't buying that the U.S. wanted to find a diplomatic solution, and Nikita Khrushchev even called it an act of aggression.
At this point, no one is backing down. Kennedy was exploring military actions, but he was hoping for a diplomatic resolution.
I remember leaving the White House at the end of that Saturday. It was a beautiful form of thinking. That might well be the last sunset I saw. You could tell. It sounds perhaps excessively dramatic to make such a statement, but the tension was so high.
Yeah, my grandpa was actually in the U.S. Army at the time.
I was in charge of assembling nuclear weapons if we had the need to do them. I was sent to Germany because of the Berlin crisis, but the Cuban crisis became a big thing while I was there. They had us on high alert, and we had orders to be ready to shoot our weapon if any war broke out, and it never got to that, but we had to be ready because it would have come down through channels. It just took time to get it assembled, and we didn't assemble something like that ahead of time. And I was on alert 24 hours a day during that 2 or 3 weeks. I virtually slept in a tent right next to my nuclear weapon for about 4 or 5 days, and then we were on alert, but not quite as high tension for quite a while after that. And so I think we were very close.
Whew. Thankfully, the US and USSR still kept communicating. On October 26th, Khrushchev apparently sent Kennedy a message trying to avoid the nuclear holocaust. He presented a possible solution that the Soviet Union will remove the missiles and that the US will promise to not invade Cuba. Later, Khrushchev also demanded that the US removes missiles from Turkey.
Robert Kennedy, who was JFK's brother and the U.S. Attorney General, secretly met with the Soviet ambassador. He apparently was saying that the U.S. was planning to remove the missiles from Turkey anyway. In return, Khrushchev made a public statement that the Soviet missiles would be removed from Cuba. By the end of November, the U.S. had ended quarantine of Cuba.
Hey guys, so the Cuban Missile Crisis is a great example of debate and diplomacy and how diplomacy saved the world when it was only 1 hour from disaster.
The nuclear age introduced a totally different dimension into political reaction to crises such as the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The crisis started with each superpower's fear of the other side being more influential in the world and having greater military might than them. In addition, it came as a direct result of the United States' failure to overthrow Castro and his communist regime.
The successful resolution of the crisis was due to both sides not giving up on debate and diplomacy and finally being able to negotiate an agreement even in the middle of the military standoff.
Kennedy was rational. Khrushchev was rational. Castro was rational. Rational individuals came that close to total destruction of their societies.
The immediate impact and consequences were that the crisis changed how the US and USSR communicated. They've installed a direct hotline between the two governments to help with faster communications in the future and negotiated nuclear treaties. The long-term effect was that both sides considered the use of military power to prove their domination, which could have caused a catastrophic chain reaction, but instead opted for a rational diplomatic solution. That led to Kennedy's rise in popularity as he forced the Soviets to back down. On the other hand, Khrushchev was called weak by his opponents and deposed in 1964. Spying, propaganda, the space race, and involvement in the international conflicts have been going on for decades since the crisis.
Since it lasted almost 50 years and affected so many, the Cold War had the largest effect on modern history, and likely its most significant event was the crisis, as the world was only an hour away from nuclear war. It was also a very powerful reminder of the importance of diplomacy as part of conflict resolution.
The Cold War ended after nearly 50 years when the Soviet Union eventually fell apart. However, Russia, which was the Soviet Union's largest republic, continued to compete for influence around the world. Most recently, the US led the efforts to negotiate with Russia not to invade Ukraine. Lack of rational thinking, like described by McNamara, already resulted in destroyed infrastructure and a devastating death toll in Ukraine, a humanitarian crisis in Europe, environmental and public health disasters, as well as threats to Western nations over supporting Ukraine's war effort. The current war in Ukraine stands in contrast to the diplomacy of the Cuban Missile Crisis because in a little more than a month, we already see unimaginable human cost and the consequences of the alternative to diplomacy.
And this has been
History by the Fire. Thank you for watching and I hope you learned something new today. Goodbye.
Bye.
I can't feel my toes.